thanks to
I'm
Monica.
like 5
That's
days.
thanks to Monica. Like, that's the guy.
That's between you and Mr. Greenspan. We have no control over what he does.
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Great. You guys always give it right answer. Okay, but you know you got the email.
Can I call this meeting to order? I'd like to read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Do we have any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. I have an update. We were to have a report here on mending a crack in the sky, and I have a statement to read, and a couple of individuals from the Somali Mothers Group will come up and read with me. On July 31st, 2019, the Toronto Police Service Board voted unanimously to approve Ken Jeffers' motion to establish a memorandum of understanding with the Mending a Crack in the Sky group, represented by Midaynta Community Services. Mending a Crack in the Sky is a group of Somali Canadian mothers who have produced a unique and unprecedented model to address gun and gang violence in their communities. The Memorandum of Understanding will establish a formal and equal working partnership between the Board, the Toronto Police Service, and MCIS to improve community safety, especially for young Somali Canadian males. The Memorandum of Understanding will allow for collaboration on 3 core elements highlighted by MCIS: transparency, building trust, and community safety, all of which are priorities of the Transformational Task Force report. The Board, the Toronto Police Service, and MCIS have been working to ensure that each of these elements is carefully accounted for in the Memorandum of Understanding, and that all relevant factors are aligned to ensure effective implementation. I have Guran Collymore and Shamsu Elmi here today. Would you like to continue on?
Yes, thank you. It was our intention to have the Memorandum of Understanding brought forward for signature and approval today, November 21st, 2019. There are, however, some remaining details to be finalized, and MCIS has agreed to a request to have the signing of the MOU deferred. Given the crisis facing the community, this deferral is for a period of 4 weeks, and the MOU will be brought forward for signature and approval at the December 16th, 2019 board meeting. We are grateful for everyone's patience and support in this matter, and we look forward to beginning this partnership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Somali mothers for agreeing to meet with me a couple of weeks ago. It was very informative, and I could see the passion that you have for your community. And I just want to thank you again for meeting with me.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll go through the agenda. Item number 1, confirmation of minutes is being held for deputation. Item number 2, we have deputations. That's full body scanner pilot project. Item number 3 is the Visual Zero enforcement team. We have deputations, so that's held. Item number 4, City of Toronto Council Street Audit, Yonge Street, Yonge-Eglinton. Do I have a motion to adopt? Anyone? Councillor Ford, seconder. Marie, all in favor? Approved. Thank you. Item number 5, Special Constable appointments and reappointments, November 2019. Do I have a motion to approve? Marie, seconder. Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? That's adopted. Item number 6, General Contractors for the Toronto Police Service Facilities, Large Renovation and Construction Projects, Pre-Qualified Vendors. Motion to approve? Ms. Mulliner? Seconder. Councillor Ford, all in favor? That's approved. Item number 7, Supply and Delivery of Printer Maintenance, Toner, and Consumables. Motion to approve. Ms. Mulliner, seconder. Councillor Ford, all in favor? That's adopted. Item number 8, the 2019 Operating Budget Variance Report for the Toronto Police Service. Do I have a motion to approve? Ms. Mulliner, seconder. Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 9, we have a deputation, so that's held. That's the Capital Budget Variance Report. Item number 10, the Operating Budget Variance Report for the Toronto Police Service Parking Enforcement Unit. Do I have a motion to approve? Councillor Ford, seconder. Ms. Shantakasera, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 11, the Operating Budget Report for the Toronto Police Service Board. Motion to approve. Ms. Shantakasera, Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 12, public minutes of meeting number 66 held on August the 28th of the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee. Do I have a motion to receive those minutes? Ms. Shantakasera, Ms. Mulliner, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 13 is held for deputations. That's the 2018 Annual Statistical Report of the Toronto Police Service. Item 14 is held for deputation. That's the semi-annual publication of expenses. Item number 15, City of Toronto Council decisions to establish places of worship. Security Task Force is held for deputations. Item number 16, the quarterly report of the Occupational Health and Safety, update for July 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2019. Motion to receive. Hold. Shantakasera. Item number 17. Ms. Shannon-Casera. That's the further response to the jury recommendations from the coroner's inquest in the death of Mr. Bradley John Chapman. Okay, that's all the items that we have today. We'll go back to item number 1, which is the confirmation of minutes. I have a deputation, which is Derek. Are you here? Mr. Moran, Derek Moran? No, seeing that Mr. Moran isn't here, do I have anybody to move the minutes? Councillor Nunziata, seconder. Ms. Molinar, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 2, full body scanner pilot project. We're doing a presentation. No presentation. Yeah, we have a presentation. I see them coming. Hello, Deputy.
This is yeah. Good afternoon. Before the board dive into the report and ask, I'm sure you have additional questions. Detective Sergeant Stefan is Prentice will give you a PowerPoint, a brief overview on high level of what we have learned from the pilot project regarding full body scanner.
Thank you, Deputy. Good afternoon, Chair, Chief, members of the board. It's my pleasure to be here to discuss the full body scanner pilot project that was conducted by the pilot project group. So we looked at what got us here was on the heels of a number of reports that talked about the way the police service interacts with members of the community. So taking those reports, guiding us on our principles of being community focused, improving our business practice, and supporting member wellness. Our goals of the project were to increase the dignity of people being searched, reduce the overall number of physical strip searches that we conducted, increase our member wellness, increase the safety of our police facilities, and reduce the number of S.I.U, OIPRD, civil claims, and HRTO applications filed against the service. Through this beginning of this project, we conducted extensive consultations both internally and externally. Here are some of the external groups that we consulted, specifically the Ministry of the Attorney General for our legal opinion, as well as the Ministry of the Solicitor General, who had installed body scanners previously and has over 26 body scanners installed at their facilities. The Toronto Police Service, I know that we've made much ado about the number of Level 3 searches that we conduct. Right now, as of the numbers between 2012 and 2016, is an average of about 55 a day. The police service, the Toronto Police Service, will be the first to test this technology in Canada. The use of the full body scanner has been used extensively in corrections, as well as in various other civil applications such as mines and other precious metals areas, but in terms of using the scanners in a policing context, we are the first. Just to touch on briefly on radiation exposure, this is new technology that's being used in this context, so there are no real specific regulations that govern their use. However, there is a lot of regulation in relation to workers being exposed to radiation, so that's predominantly what we have to guide us on that particular topic. In terms of radiation exposure of people that are being scanned, we used the principle that comes out of the United States called ALARA, which is as low as reasonably achievable. And you'll see later on how the radiation exposure to individuals is actually quite low. And in terms of radiation exposure by workers, it's non-existent. So our members receive no radiation exposure as a result of operating the full body scanner. There's an exclusionary zone that goes around the body scanner, and if you're standing outside that zone while the scanner is in use, you receive no radiation. The Ministry of Labour, which governs the use of full body use of X-ray technology, has classified us as X-ray operators and not radiation workers. If we were radiation workers, then we would be required to report any exposure to radiation. In terms of the scanner itself and what sort of levels of radiation people are exposed to when they're being scanned, just being on the Earth exposes us to radiation. So for example, 1 year of exposure of just extraterrestrial radiation would be the equivalent of 6,000 scans, or taking a flight from New York City from Toronto would be the equivalent of about 80 scans. So the individual scan itself is, radiation dosage is quite low. One scan would be the equivalent of eating approximately 2 bananas. You'd have about the same amount of radiation, or standing out in the sunlight for about an hour. As I said before, the Ministry of the Solicitor General had purchased 26 scanners dating back to 2015. So there was a lot of lessons learned from our body scanner project in relation to what the Ministry of the Solicitor General was able to accomplish by installing full body scanners in their facilities. So with that in mind, we undertook to conduct a pilot. So the pilot consisted of putting out an RFEOI, it's an expression of interest, out to the marketplace, where we asked for 2 vendors to test equipment for 3 months each at one of our facilities. We chose 14 Division because it had the space to accommodate the scanner as well. It processed a lot of prisoners, so we would get good usable data from installing in that particular location. So the vendors provided us these scanners at no cost. So all the costs that were related to training and some facility modification are there before you, about $40,000 in those costs. This is a picture of one of our vendors, the Sodor model. And I know it's not the greatest quality up on the screen here, but this is sort of like a sample stock image that comes from their website. And you can see here the image on the right-hand side. There's a mini cell phone on the right-hand side, and then you see the faint outline circled with a ceramic knife in the middle and a bullet fragment that had been lodged in that person. So this is sort of a sample of what you would see, although having seen the actual images, they're not quite as clearly defined as what you see here. This is sort of the marketing image, so this is going to be the best image. So it's actually a lot clearer here than it would be actually in real life. That's the second vendor, which was Vision Tech. They're very similar machines. You'll see that on the right-hand side, there's a little handlebar with a sliding platform that just slides back and forth. So the person, when they're being scanned, they stand on that platform. A very narrow beam of X-rays are emitted from the machine. As the person moves across, it takes about 8 seconds. And then through the software, that image is then digitally put back together to show a complete comprehensive image. So here are just some sample images from that second machine. So the way we trained our members was the vendors came and gave individual training. We had a few officers that were trained as radiation safety officers, and they were required by Ministry of Labor in order to provide overall safety for the X-ray unit at 14 Division. So in the end, we ended up training 77 operators. So we trained all of the supervisors, sergeants, staff sergeants, as well as all the bookers and female officers at the station. So at the end of both projects, there was a delay where we didn't have a scanner installed because we used the same division. So we had to remove one scanner, and then we had to wait for the second scanner to be delivered. The Ministry of Labor then had to take some time to authorize that scanner's use. So there was about a 2-month window in between where there was no scanner. So the first part of the project was in the latter half of 2018, the last 3 months, and the second phase was in the first 3 months of 2019. So out of that 6-month total, we had a total number of level 3 searches that were authorized as 594. The number of scans that we conducted on those authorized level 3 searches was 52%, or 311. The number of physical strip searches that was done was 48%, 283. And of the 311 people that were scanned, 296 of the people responded that they had been previously strip searched. And of that number, 95% reported that they preferred being scanned versus being strip searched. And when we surveyed our members showed that 80% had a positive opinion about the full body scanner. Just some items of note were a person was found with a knife, crack pipe, some safety pins, and heroin wrapped in toilet paper. So the scanners really did a good job of locating metallic, non-metallic, ceramic, and organic items that were not naturally occurring in the body. But again, it was a very much a developed skill with the operators because they're not scanning hundreds of people a day. Learning how to read and interpret those scans took some time. So but the confidence in their ability to read the scans and understand them was high. So So some of the benefits we realized, it was an opportunity for us to review our procedures regarding search, which included a review of Golden. So that was all incorporated into our training at that division prior to the scanner being installed. During the testing period of the scanner, there were no known S.I.U. or APRD complaints relating to the level 3 search process. And overall, we did notice an increased level of dignity and a reduced level of intrusiveness for those being searched. And it was difficult in terms of the post-arrested person survey. We had a limited amount of time to survey these people that were arrested and a limited amount of information that we wanted to ask people. So we took the simplest questions we could find that would garner us the greatest amount of information. And overall, the members reported as well that their wellness was increased as a result of using the scanners. They felt that it made people more relaxed and cooperative, and also that the facilities were safer. Moving forward, the hardware footprint and facilities is a challenge for the full body scanner project moving forward. It would require a degree of capital funding and renovation of existing facilities to get the footprint required to install a full body scanner. We do need a space of about 11 feet by 20 feet. So space is at a bit of a premium. So that is something that moving forward would be a roadblock for installing at divisions. In terms of costs, the machines themselves do carry significant costs. We don't know the exact costs yet because we're currently in an RFP process now. So we don't have exact costing on what that would look like moving forward in the future, but that's information that we should have in the coming weeks. Just a little bit of an outline on costing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. We have a couple of deputants, so I'd like to hear from them first, and then perhaps you can come back and answer questions. Thank you. Mr. Sewell, can you come forward? Welcome. You have 5 minutes. You can let me know when you're ready. We'll start the clock. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is a really mind-boggling report. It lists objectives. There's 5 objectives. It misses a key objective, which is how do you make sure you do something that's cost-effective. But outside of that, they're reasonable objectives. And it's fair to say that most other police forces would agree with them and try to meet them on a regular basis. And the report notes that this police force is the only one that's even thinking of full-body scanners as a way to go. So what are the other police forces doing? Well, they're strip searching an awful lot less people. They strip search in Ontario, the large ones, about 1% of the people arrested. Toronto Police Force, 35 to 40% of the people arrested. Unbelievable. So you'd think that if we wanted to reach these objectives, we might look at what other police forces are doing. They're strip searching a lot less people, 35 times less people. So that would be one thing we could do what they're doing. A second thing we could do is we could look at what the OIPRD suggested. They made some very good recommendations to you and to the government in March, saying that what you should be doing is doing a frisk or a pat-down before you even consider a strip search. And they suggested if you did that, you'd probably be strip searching about 1% of the people arrested. It's really simple. Strip search, just a frisk or a pat-down. No technology needed, no extra training needed. Could be done immediately. They also noted that Toronto police have been subject to about 40 lawsuits in the last 18 years about strip searching, where the courts have thrown out charges because of the strip searches done. And that, of course, interferes with one of your objectives here about reducing the number of claims. So that's a second thing you could do. Pay attention to what the OIPRD says. A third thing you could do is actually take a look at what the Supreme Court of Canada suggested 18 years ago in 2001, where they said frisk or pat down before you do a strip search. They said strip searches are humiliating and demeaning. So there's 3 places you could go to find a different solution than this expensive thing that you're suggesting. Simply stop humiliating and demeaning so many people. And it's very clear to me that the Toronto Police are uninterested in learning from others. What's gone wrong? Why is our police force so unwilling to change its behavior? Does it really think its role is to humiliate and demean people? Or is it that the Toronto Police have too easy access to money? We know the cost of this one, about $450,000. We know the cost of other ones, about $300,000. But in fact, if you paid attention to what other forces are doing, the ORPD says, Supreme Court of Canada, you wouldn't be strip searching nearly the number of people. Our organization has been before this board too many times in the last decade saying, don't strip search so many people. It's easy to change the things you should be doing. Time is now right for change. And the board should start acting like a reasonable governance body and do what the Supreme Court recommended 18 years ago, what the OIPRD recommended 8 months ago, and take a course of action that other police forces do and that satisfies the objectives you've laid out. So our 2 recommendations are really simple. The board should adopt a policy which requires a frisk or pat-down search first, and only if there is a reasonable suspicion that something is being hidden on or in the body may a strip search be undertaken. And secondly, at the same time, stop the direction of this pilot project and return the money to provincial government or use it for some more worthwhile projects. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Sewell? Mayor Tory?
There we go. Mr. Sewell, thank you for the deputation. I will tell you that your deputation caused me to ask during the earlier part of this meeting today that I got a copy of the Supreme Court decision and the one that followed the Ward and Vancouver case just to read what they had to say, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It's my understanding, and when you were going to start to talk about the most important objective that was missed, and you then said cost-effective, I thought what you were going to say, which you subsequently did, that the most important objective should be to start with compliance with our existing policies and existing case law before we started worrying about buying machines. And I presume you would agree with that. That actually would be the most important thing that we should try to do.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, that it's more important that we have compliance. I understand the existing policy, and unfortunately the way this works, I have to ask you questions before I can ask the chief. My understanding is our existing policy of the Toronto Police Service, let alone what the case law clearly says, which is that you should, and your recommendation, which is you should frisk and pat down first before you move to any other kind of search.
The policy doesn't say that. I'm
Our
sorry,
policy.
it does not say that. If it said that, it would be really interesting. If it said you have to do it, and only if there's but it doesn't
All right.
say
Well,
that at the
you'll
moment.
see, I'm going to ask a question of the chief, and I have a motion that I'm going to put depending on the answers, because I think it sounds orderly and reasonable that that should be the case. So we'll take that as part of what you've submitted. But here's the question I wanted to ask about the body scanners. If that policy, if
Can
you're,
I just give a
go ahead,
further
please.
answer?
Go ahead.
Okay. If that was the case, you wouldn't, if you were doing the frisk or pat, you wouldn't be doing the number of strip searches you do. If I can just go to number 13, your stats report, which I provided a letter on, 40% of the times you do a strip search, you find nothing. 40%. 55% of the times you do a strip search, you find something that's inconsequential. In only 3% of the times you do a strip search, do you find evidence. And that's your own data.
Okay.
So if you were doing the pat down, you wouldn't be doing those strip searches.
So you will see that my motion asks the question, in instances where there has been a pat-down search done and nothing of significance was found, in how many cases was that followed, based on our own statistics, by a level 3 search? So, because I want to know those facts, because it would suggest that you're saying either one of two things happened, which is, number one, there was no pat-down search done first, or that there was one done, nothing was found, but nonetheless, level 3 search. And I'm only trying to say that I've listened to what you've had to say, but I want to ask you one other question, and that is this. In the event that we got the compliance with the case law and or with our own policy in order so that we had a significantly reduced number of level 3 searches, would it still be your view that using this means of doing level 3 searches was not preferable to the current method, which is you take people's clothes off and whatnot? In other words, don't you think that if we could get the number down to be a more defensible number consistent with law and policy, that this actually would represent a better way to do it?
If you get the number down to 1%, I think that in those cases you can do strip searches. And yes, it's going to be a problem, but in fact, in those 1%, you're probably going to find something, and therefore it'll be worthwhile. But I don't think you want to spend this staggering amount of money for that very, very few cases.
That's a very honest answer. So you're saying even if we got it down to a very low level, you'd still say we should spend the money on something else?
When you look at what we need to spend money on to make this a safer city, it's not on body scanners, it's on putting money into youth programs. That's how we're going to actually get ahead, and we simply aren't putting enough money in there. And it's just a wrong policy of the police to say, oh no, give us more money, we can spend money. Wrong way to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Sewell? Thank you very much. Mr. Bryant? Is Mr. Bryant here? No? Can I call the staff back then, please? Deputy? Yes, we received a written deputation from Mr. Bryant, and we've accepted it. So if he's watching, we have your deputation written. Okay. Questions of the deputy? Mayor Tory?
Either during or after the period that's covered by all these numbers, and particularly after, did it bring about a reduction in the number of level 3 searches? In other words, obviously, I guess the scans replaced a level 3 search in the ordinary circumstance during the pilot, but did you find afterwards, that after the period that was reported on here, that in fact it also brought about, because there was an implication through the presentation that it taught us a lot about the criteria and applying the policy and whatnot. There was an implication that that meant there were fewer level 3 searches conducted after the use of the scanner was implemented.
Mr. Mayor, I can answer that question. Same time last year when we did the pilot project in 14th Division, the same time frame, we had 444 level 3 search by the conventional way. While we did the pilot project, because you heard the presentation, we reintroduced and re-educated our members on the strictness of level 3 and the guidelines and the policies, and we noticed a number of 323. So it went from 444 to 323. I would attribute somewhat to the body scanner, or somewhat to the training that we instill in our members, the importance of articulating the right reasons, the right circumstance, the right approach in dealing with a level 3 search. So I can only present these numbers to you as a comparative.
So speaking of comparative numbers, can you, and I'm happy to have the chief join in on answering this, I don't know what the sort of, if there's a correct ratio. Really, if you look at the legal test, because I did take the trouble to read the court cases this morning, it sort of talks about the kind of significant expectations you should have, or suspicions, or whatever the right word is, before you would order a level 3 search. Can you explain to me why Toronto's numbers, without assuming which number was right or wrong, whether it's 1%, 4%, why would Toronto's numbers be so inconsistent with numbers reported by other police services around the country?
I did a little research this morning, and if you look at the report by the OIPRD on breaking the golden rule, the director surveyed every police services in Ontario in terms of why are they keeping strip search and how many. I can report to you, Barrie Service, York region doesn't keep stats, so there's no number to measure, no number to report. Halton doesn't keep stats. Peel doesn't keep stats. So a number of these police services around in Ontario, they don't keep stats. So when they compare to Toronto, obviously Toronto, we do keep stats. And that's why the number seems out of whack. But the report is clearly stated from page 48 to 62. So I had a look at it, and Guelph Services, police service doesn't keep stats. So OPP, they don't keep stats. So I just want to draw that to your attention, Mr. Mayor.
Chief, did you want to add to that?
No, I'm just going to add to that because I think it's really important. First off, the objective of this whole process and what we're doing as an organization is understanding the sensitivity of level 3 searches and the impact that it has and how it does create some erosion with the community. I can tell you by law, we are responsible for people we keep in custody. And we have to make sure that they're not in harm's way in any way, shape, or form. We have done various things. We've changed our procedure a multitude of times by listening to some of the issues and concerns the board has presented to us, by some of the deputations that have taken effect, to which is why we're here always looking for the best standard. The simple answer to why, even if there's a comparative, as to why Toronto is different, is because we deal with different communities. We are the only city in Ontario that has 3 supervised injection sites. We have issues when it comes to some of the people that we do come across within the drug subculture. Secreting evidence, secreting your drugs is something that is very common. We have to look at each situation individually, our exposure to those moments, what causes things, and when we look at procedure, the first thing we do is a pat-down. We do the pat-down before we put them in the vehicle for 3 reasons. So by law, it's to protect them from injuring themselves or others. 2, it's for evidence, as I speak to in the drug subculture. And 3 is to avoid escape. So if you've got the pins, the hangers of the pins that you can use to take off the handcuffs. So that is the first thing that is done. I added another layer to the officer in charge that says, just because a person is going to be kept in custody for a long time, that doesn't necessarily mean you automatically go to a level 3. So you have to look at it on an individual basis, always recognizing that we are responsible for the custody of everyone that we have. Now, I don't want to play percentages because that becomes something that would not necessarily be, I think, the accurate way of looking at things. So let's take our case in point just a couple of weeks ago. We do the pat search, and at the end of the day, you capture on video a person pulling out a gun. So we have to be careful because A, the officer safety piece, as different techniques come into play with how to secrete weapons, how to secrete contraband, it is necessary for us to make sure that we have responses to that. And number 2, when we talk about today's subcultures, and when we are talking to informants and agents that know some of the methodology that we use and how to one-up it to get contraband in. You've got a person secreting a cell phone. You've got drugs. You've got weapons that are made out of ceramics. It's a different playing field that we're dealing with when it comes to today's environment, but what's more important is the how. What do we do? And so as we look at less intrusive ways and still capturing that safety component for everybody, it gets us to here. And through discussion, we're always striving to figure out what the right answer is to that very question.
Thanks, Chief. Mayor Tory?
My final question was to the chief, which is, was I right in understanding, because I talked briefly with Mr. Sewell about this, that and I think you just alluded to it, the existing policy of the Toronto Police Service is, and it's a little confusing to me because you were talking about instances out on the street, as it were, where they're not going to conduct a level 3. That's what happened in the Golden case. But the pat down is a requirement of procedure, but I presume it's also not the case that they get patted down again in the police station if they're taken there before a level 3 search is ordered, or do they?
Well, so what happens is your pat down is dealing with the outside environment and making sure the privacy issues and concerns. When they're brought in, then you will take off certain layers of coats and jackets to look through, and then depending on the offense and depending on the circumstance in which the apprehension was made and what the criminal offense is, and by law, you figure out whether or not this would be necessary for a level 3. So it's progressive. and how it is done, and it is done through respecting the dignity at all costs, but also more importantly by law, so that when we do go to court, we have the opportunity of articulating we've done everything we possibly could in that moment, and not just going to that level 3 search right away.
So to be much more precise then, if you're taken to the police station, regardless of what happened at the squad car out on the street, you're taken to the police station before you have a level 3 search, if you have one, will you have had a pat down at the police station?
Generally, you do get a pat-down search, yes.
Is that what the policy or procedure requires, that at the police station you would have, before you had a level 3, if you got one, you would have a pat down?
That's our training, but is it actually written within the procedure as well, too?
It's written level 1, level 2.
Stand by, sir.
Yes, Ms. Mulliner? Yep.
So while we're looking for that answer, Deputy Yuen, I just want to go back to the facts that were outlined on the report at for me it's page 5 of the report. I'm not sure what it is for folks looking at it on other documents. It's the results of the pilot project, where you were reporting that of the total number of level 3 searches, 52% were searched using the body scanner and 48% were searched using the traditional method. Are you able to tell us this is about what was found, how often were items, and I know there's a range of items that get found, so how often were items that could be used, as the chief said, for either hurting oneself or someone else, evidence, or avoiding escape found?
We have listed some of the items were found, but I would suggest that out of the 500 what was the number? The level 3.
There were 594.
Yeah, the 52%. I would say maybe about 5 or 6 items that were found from the actual search.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we'll probably have a more fulsome conversation about this. It just strikes me, and I've had some concerns about this issue all along, that the body scanner isn't the right response, because the volume of evidence that is found on these bad people, who you probably know are bad people because you brought them into custody. So those that are carrying bad stuff, who would be at risk, that there are so few of those in the general course of an arrest that the body scanner is not the right response, and that the first response, and we'll hear more about it, is the frisk, the pat down, and then you get to, okay, we still think this is a really bad person, so we're going to put them through a next step, which could be a full body search or a body scanner, depending on where you're located at the time of the custody arrest. Thank you.
Councilor Nunziata?
Is it on? Oh, it's on. Yeah. So, in the measuring of the results, so 296 of the 311 claimed that they had previously been strip searched, and that 281 reported that they preferred the scan over being strip searched. Correct?
That's correct.
Now, was this data? Was this part of the September to October 2018? Was that all?
That was during a 6-month pilot project.
And the data that we have is just for the 2 months?
No, for the 6 months.
Pardon?
For the 6 months.
Oh, okay, so September, when did the data start? It says September.
We started almost Q4 of 2018, and then we ran it to the spring of 2019, and we tested two equipments, 2 machines, and those were the questions posed to the accused person after they had experienced the full body scanner search process.
Okay, so the data that's here on page 21, September 10th to October 31st, that's 2018, correct? Like, I'm just looking at what's here, so is it September 10th, 2018 to October 31st, 2018? Is that correct?
Which one are you referring to, Councilor?
In the presentation. In the presentation, page 21.
Page 21.
reading this incorrectly, or? I don't know.
Is that the one with the title measuring results, Counselor?
Next page.
Next page.
The one where it says knife on him, crack pipe.
Oh, those are the
safety
data,
pins.
but you were asking about
Well, this
the
was done, the
survey.
data, is it between September 10th, 2018 to October? that
Yes,
These items
yes,
were?
yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
what was my
okay.
question. So.
Okay, sorry, I
it's a matter of-
misunderstood your
It's a matter
question,
of
yes.
less than 2 months,
Yeah.
these items, part of the data were
Yes.
what, okay.
Thank you.
That's what I want to know, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a question, Deputy. Just want to
Yes,
follow
sure.
up on Meritori's question. You mentioned you educated the officers in 14 Division before the pilot, correct?
We trained them because prior to, the detective sergeant showed some scans. Those scans needs to be taught and trained how to read them because it's quite sophisticated because the vendor has to train us how to read those scans to isolate certain areas of the body to, it's akin to a doctor reading an x-ray and understanding what that blackness, that dot means. So we had to train our officers.
And I guess part of that training would give the officers more focus on level 3 searches, make them more aware, because you said the numbers went down during the pilot project.
The first
correct?
lesson plan is to let's review the level 3 search
Right.
procedures.
So
Let's
that
have
reduced
everybody on the
numbers.
same page, understanding why we do it, how we do it, and articulate the right reasons for doing it.
Right. Then post-pilot, after the scanner was removed, did those numbers stay down? So did the education result in 2 things, learning how to use the technology, but also having a renewed focus on level 3 searches and reducing numbers?
You know, unfortunately, I don't have those stats for you, Chair, but I can certainly get back to you with those
I'm
stats.
gonna-
Post the pilot, I certainly can get
Great.
those data for you.
Thanks. I'll be moving a motion in that regard. Thank you. Any other questioners? Chandra, Sarah?
I'm just wondering, I know that with, for example, the full body, the body-worn cameras initiatives, there was kind of a public perception type study that you did to see how the public felt about this kind of technology. Just wondering if there was any exploration of that. Because I mean, I'm thinking about the issue for me personally at the airport, for example, going through a full body scanner. Much rather do that than have someone pat me down, right? So I'm just thinking, was there any kind of thinking around that to see what the public perceptions of that might be?
We had a communication strategy, and we did consult it, not as extensively as if this is going to go full, full service that it could be approved. Once we are in the process of, anticipation whether if this is approved, definitely there'll be a consultative period, a phase that we will consult with the public, and because right now you look at the report, we don't even know how many we can get, where we're going to go. So there are a lot of different factors hinges on that. So communication is definitely on our top of our minds to consult with the public.
Thank you very much. I believe we have some motions on the board. Yes.
Chair, these are, you've got one that actually sort of goes first. It is more general, but I guess following along with the comments of some of the deputants, including Mr. Sewell in particular, and also my own desire to sort of see more information. I mean, I have no, it wasn't clear to me whether the pilot is continuing or whether it's sort of over. There was information presented about the way forward, which implied that we might buy more of these and do more of this. And I think there are some reasons in terms of the preference of this kind of level 3, if I can call it, meaning full body scanner versus the sort of old-fashioned method that would commend it to us. However, for my part, I'm not interested in hearing about expanding this and buying more pieces of equipment, regardless of what the cost is, until we sort of go back to the beginning of this, which is to try to determine as best we can whether, and I didn't get yet an answer, I guess, on what the existing policy is, but I'm told the existing policy says, and the chief implied this with regard to what goes on the street, that you do a frisk or a pat down first, and that only then would you move to a level 3. So I'm certainly interested in knowing from this report I've asked for here by March, what the level of compliance with that is. In other words, we must keep a record of these things, because that's where these statistics come from that say in each instance where you did a level 3 in the end, did you first do, as I heard, I think the policy requires, or the procedure, a frisk or pat down first, so that we can see is the policy being complied with, because there's certainly the suggestion of those who had a chance to look at these numbers over time that perhaps that's not the case, but I'd like to know. Secondly, I would like to know whether we have any records that would allow us to conclude, because the tests that are set out in the Supreme Court cases, and I did get them thanks to the board staff getting them for me and read them, are quite prescriptive in terms of talking about the instances in which a level 3 search would be called for. And I won't go through them now because we don't have time, but they talk about a real apprehension that people would have that there would be a weapon or a drug or some piece of evidence that would compromise safety or otherwise. So I'd like to know if we have records that would sort of say, well, we, in this case, instructed there should be a level 3 search because we saw this or thought that or whatever. And I think there's more, isn't there? There we go. Then this was a question that I asked of the chief, I think, or of Mr. Deputy Yuen, which is, do we have records that would indicate during 2017 and 2018 that there was a frisk and pat down conducted, consistent with policy and consistent with what the courts have said should be done, and nothing of significance or relevance was found, but nonetheless it was followed by a level 3 search. And then when there was that level 3 search, was anything found? And then, having heard in D here that we don't have statistics from a lot of places, there seem to be some statistics people cite. So I'm just saying, if there are some in other statistics, how come, if our level is higher in those instances, why would it be higher? Well, there must be an explanation. And then the last part is actually yours.
Then E, from the lessons learned in the pilot project, both during the project and after the project, would like to have some understanding what was learned and whether that, if level 3 searches did go down, especially post-project, is that something that can be replicated throughout the service?
So, Mr. Chair, just to conclude my own comments on the parts that I put forward, I understand completely and support the need for the police to keep themselves safe, to keep the people who have been apprehended safe, to keep other people in jail, in court, or wherever else safe, to recover evidence that needs to be recovered. But I think if we're sort of looking as to what we can do to do this better, I'm even prepared to accept the fact, based on the survey and based on comments from the deputy and others, that this would be a preferable way to do level 3 searches over the old, I'll call it the old way. However, I think we're sort of putting the cart ahead of the horse here, in that probably the first thing we should look at, given the number of times this has been raised over the years at the board, and first look at whether we really have the number of level 3 searches, whether conducted by scanner or by a human being, down to where it should be consistent with the well-established case law in the country and with, I gather, our own policies. I'm told, and I don't know if it's true, I forgot to ask this question of the officers, that after this pilot, that in fact the number of level 3 searches declined quite significantly in the division where the pilot was taking place, which is interesting to me in that it may suggest that that education that the deputy did make reference to taught people a little more about applying the criteria properly and sort of caused people to think more carefully about this, because I agree with the court. This is a humiliating thing to go through, and I'm not saying there aren't people who are accused of very serious criminal offenses. Some of them get convicted. Some of the evidence is found by these searches, but we should be doing it in compliance with well-established case law and well-established policies. And so that's why I would like to have this information, so we can see then whether there's more we should be doing right away, or whether it's really just that if we adopted our own policies and followed them, that we would see these numbers drop quite significantly.
Any questions of the mover? Seeing none. Tori, you'd like to move all of them? Okay, I would be more than happy to second it. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 3, Vision Zero Enforcement Team to support City of Toronto Police Service Road Safety Plan. We have 3 deputants. I'd like to call on Mr. Sewell first. And we have received your written deputation as well, Mr. Sewell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan and the proposal to assign 4 officers in the day and evening shifts 5 days a week. We think that's a good idea. But we strongly disagree that these officers should be secured by callback overtime or new hires. We believe there are more than enough officers now working for the Toronto Police Service to do this new work without compromising other policing objectives. There are two ways I think you can get the officers. One is by abandoning the rule that you have to have 2 officers in a car after dark. That's a great waste of good talent, and we should be reassigning some of those officers into doing this traffic enforcement. And I think those officers would be available for other work if this practice were abandoned. Secondly, we could start to change more seriously the existing shift structure, which requires as many officers to be on duty at 4 a.m. as at 7 p.m. And in fact, if we change that, and I know that some change has taken place, I don't think very much, but if in fact we moved ahead more quickly on that, we could easily reassign officers to do this road traffic work. So we're suggesting that in fact you should agree with the change suggested, the 8 new officers a day, but in fact it should be done by reassignment from changing either of those 2 policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions for Mr. Sewell? No, seeing none. Thank you, sir. Sean Marshall.
Good afternoon. I represent Walk Toronto. I'm a co-founder and member of the steering committee. Vision Zero is an internationally recognized set of road safety tenets that aims to reduce all fatalities and severe injuries in a municipality to 0 over the course of a year, while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all, especially vulnerable road users such as pedestrians. But road design, engineering controls, and enforcement are all essential pillars for reducing road violence on our streets. Road improvements force vehicle operators to slow down and take notice, while improving the visibility and safety of vulnerable road users, especially pedestrians and cyclists. In the meantime, City of Toronto is focused on reducing speed limits, adding traffic signals, and designating school safety zones and senior safety zones. But this has been more about putting up signs. Signs have no effect, have no consequences for disobeying them. At Walk Toronto, we have noticed the lack of police enforcement of safe speeds, red light running, illegal turns, and distracted driving. There may be the occasional well-publicized blitz, but for the most part, motorists in Toronto know they can get away with risky and dangerous behavior because the likelihood of getting caught is negligible. At best, Toronto's response to road violence has been reactive rather than proactive. To date, we counted 34 pedestrians killed on Toronto streets this year. In 2018, 42 pedestrians were killed. Not just on city streets, though, but on sidewalks, at bus stops, and even inside a bus shelter. Earlier this year, a home was struck in East York. Meanwhile, police are being deployed downtown not so much to protect pedestrians, but ensure traffic isn't impeded at busy intersections during rush hours. We're outraged, but not shocked, by a recent Toronto Star report that found the number of traffic tickets issued dropped from 700,000 in 2010 to just 200,000 in 2018, and there are no officers assigned to full-duty local traffic enforcement. This is a growing city with an aging population, and there have been enhanced provincial penalties for distracted, reckless, and impaired driving introduced over the last few years. The Toronto Police Service has failed the city's most vulnerable road users. Though red light cameras, photo radar, and automated school bus stop signs are useful tools, there's no substitute for old-fashioned police enforcement. Although new dedicated officers are a good step in recognizing this, as long as enforcement does not target Indigenous, racialized, and other communities that are already disproportionately affected by policing. In the end, we need both better designed streets and a new direction that the Toronto Police Service will have no tolerance for unsafe driving in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Any questions? Thank you very much. Kagan Gartz. Welcome. You have
Hello,
5
Ma-
minutes. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Hello, members of the Toronto Police Services Board. My name is Keegan. I'm the Interim Executive Director for Cycle Toronto. We are a member-supported, not-for-profit organization that works to make, that makes Toronto a healthy, safe, and vibrant cycling city for everyone.
My name is Jessica Speaker. I'm a spokesperson for a group called Friends and Families for Safe Streets. We are a group of people whose loved ones have been killed in road violence or who have survived road violence ourselves. The recent police report clearly addressed the relationship between the lack of enforcement by Toronto Police and the rates of preventable crashes. This was a revelation to us. While anecdotally we'd heard countless times how much worse driver behavior in Toronto had become, we had no idea that internally most dedicated traffic enforcement had ceased. As you well know, since the disbanding of the STEM team, tickets dropped by about 2/3 and rates of violent preventable death nearly doubled. In 2015, I survived my own serious crash. A woman driving a huge SUV made an inattentive left turn and T-boned me at high speed. She broke my spine, inflicted a brain injury, and did such extensive damage to my left side that I developed a big blood clot in my left leg, and a piece of that blood clot broke off and chewed through my heart and landed across both lobes of my lungs. I nearly died twice because of road violence. My injuries will never completely heal, and the after effects of this crash will haunt me for the rest of my life. This is not the life that I'm supposed to be living. Now that we're bowled over with this new knowledge that our police force should have been doing so much more for years, how are we supposed to understand what this means for our families? If rates of crashes have nearly doubled since 2012, would this violence that was inflicted on me have been averted had the STEM team never been dismantled? How many of the innocent, loved human beings killed since 2012 would still be alive today? Would Samuel Dan Kumar still be alive? Would Celeste Jones still be alive? Would Miguel Candia still be alive? Would Elder de Oliveira Bueno still be alive? Would Evangeline La Rosa still be alive?
In the absence of a citywide connected cycling network of protected bike lanes, police enforcement of rules like passing too closely, speeding, and distracted driving is often the only thing people biking have to rely upon for their safety. We know, of course, that redesigning our roads is the most effective tool in the Vision Zero toolbox, but enforcement is also essential. On many roads, a thin painted line or a shared lane marking is the only thing between a person biking and a motor vehicle traveling 60 kilometers an hour, sometimes more. And sometimes there's less protection than even that. While Ontario has a 1 meter passing rule that enforces that people need to give sufficient space, often we're not seeing any enforcement of that at all. We are supportive of the city's push to implement automated speed enforcement as part of its Vision Zero plan, and we're hopeful for the future. We think that this technology will address dangerous driving on a large scale. But until that happens, we need at minimum the level of enforcement that we saw when the STEM project was active. Enforcing traffic safety is policing. This is not a special project. Ensuring that both drivers and police officers know the rules of the Highway Traffic Act and that they are enforcing dangerous driving is the minimum standard that we expect from a police force with a $1 billion budget.
But now that this has happened, what should be the next steps to address it? Until the province comes through on automated enforcement, we need the STEM team and its resources redeployed to the same level as 2012 at a minimum. This enforcement should not be considered an extra duty, performed by police. It is one of the most basic components of any municipal police force. 3 officers on the streets between 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. at a time across the whole city of Toronto and only on weekdays is not good enough. Dangerous driving occurs at all hours of the day, and road violence is not limited to weekdays. Road violence is an urgent public health crisis, and the families that have been shattered since 2012 deserve better.
Thank you very much for your deputations. Do you have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Members, any questions of the service? Mayor Tory?
Yes, I'd like to ask the chief or his designate, the cost of actually deploying these officers and budgeting for them as full-time officers that are not relying on overtime. What's the differential, plus or minus? I mean, in that, is it significant, or is it actually about the same on an annual basis, recognizing the funding that you had coming from the city was one time? But if you said rather than having these people do it on overtime, we were actually going to have the number of officers provided for here paid as full-time officers in addition to the current complement, what would the cost be? A lot more, a lot less, or the same?
Well, when we speak to the cost, and it's also the time in which we can actually implement. So right now with what we have in play, it gives the opportunity for a quicker response to the situation that's out there with the roadway safety. And I will say one of the things when we talk about Vision Zero, the fact that it is a coordinated effort when we look at maximizing all of the resources, utilizing all of the stakeholders that have involvement with traffic flow and enforcement, we're seeing some tangible results. I'll also speak to, I want to be careful with the numbers piece. It was a very compelling deputation, so thank you very much for that. Certainly something we're going to be looking at quite hard. When we look at the earlier years, when times when we had 400, 300 more officers, our fatalities were higher. So in 2002 we had 97. In 2003 we had 74. And so when we look at what's going on right now, especially with our pedestrian fatality, the #1 issue year after year has been over 65 mid-block. And so having the strategic approach of looking at what do we do to make the city more friendly for our growing aging community, and looking at the dynamics of the traffic flow where, we've now gone from just cars to bikes to motorcycles to e-bikes to scooters, and it goes on. The complexity is so much more difficult, and having that continuous discussion with all stakeholders, I'm seeing much more strategic, much more sustainable solutions, which I think is becoming critical. And Superintendent Baptiste, who definitely has a lot of knowledge in this, can emphasize a little bit more.
Hi, everyone. I guess one of the most important things with the proposal that's been brought forward is the fact that through the callback basis, we are provided with flexibility that goes far beyond what we would have if it was dedicated full-time employees. It allows us to take the intelligence data that we get from Toronto Transportation about specific locations, days of the week, times of the day, where they have identified opportunities or potential for safety improvement with regards to killed and serious injury collisions. And we can put officers there, officers on a callback basis, where if there is not the performance that we expect, then they will not be offered that detail again. It's high volume enforcement that is focused and directed on specific problem behaviors at specific problem times. And this funding will allow us some flexibility to do that in a very strategic way. So I think that's important. Over the longer term, yes, we need a dedicated team that can be in place, that we can utilize on an ongoing basis. But if you look at the enforcement levels that have been observed over the last 20 years, the graph speaks for itself. However, STEM was only about 80,000 tickets a year. $80,000 in that drop. The rest of that drop is attributed to the difference in staffing levels in the Toronto Police Service.
So, Mr. Chair, maybe Mr. Veneziano, I understand the comments made by the superintendent with respect to the flexibility that's given by using overtime, but at the same time, the flip side of that is that using overtime, it's possible people might not sign up for it. I also see no reason why if it was permanent police officers, you couldn't take the very same list that's appended to the report. And I noticed like there's 4 locations on Jane Street and say, fine, under your direction or somebody else's, those people are going to go to Jane Street where we've identified a problem. But I just want to make sure we get the answer on the record, because I don't want to move something that's irresponsible and that's going to cost us a lot more money. But I would intend to make a motion that says we should add this to the budget so that it's not something that where we only have 1 year identified of funding through the city. This came from the city. This is not, I think we should be clear, this is not an initiative of the police service. It's an initiative of the city, and we supplied the money to go with it. But I'm trying to think of a better way to spend that money and to make it permanent so that we're not talking next year about saying, well, what's going to happen to that program? So my question is, and maybe Mr. Veneziano, just ballpark, the same number of officers employed full-time with all the benefits and pension and everything else, new officers, meaning an addition to the complement, would that cost more or less than the $1 million for the same period of time for the same work?
It's about the same.
Okay.
It'll buy you about 7 officers at, let's say, $150,000.
Okay. So it's not radically more.
So it's not radically more,
okay.
but I think it's back to in the first year, giving us that flexibility. I think we all agree that to make this sustainable, we've got to go back to what we had with STEM and budget for it accordingly. But
I heard the chief's comment. I think it's a reasonable one to say if we wanted to get this going faster, we could use the overtime to start. But then if the budget, which won't be approved until February or something, provided for these to be taken on full time, that we could do that at really no significant increased cost, right? I think that's what you said. Yes.
Yes.
Now the other question I have, and I don't know who might answer it, is the report, and I say this respectfully because I think you probably had lots to do with writing it, Superintendent. The report created the impression that there was no traffic enforcement being done by anybody as a result of a decision taken, I believe, in 2012, 7 years ago, to abolish this. I wasn't around then. I don't know who else was. But the report created the impression there was just no traffic enforcement being done. But it's my understanding I saw somebody on TV the other night handing out tickets on Midland Avenue, and properly so. But there's still, and there's always room for more, and there's room for the technology we're going to employ with photo radar and with red light cameras. We're doing that. But there is still extensive traffic enforcement going on as part of the existing complement of the Toronto Police Service, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
It is, as has been said already, it is the fundamental role of a police officer, a uniformed police officer anywhere, whether it's the City of Toronto or any other jurisdiction that I'm aware of. And our officers do that. I guess where that report failed to go was the fact that our police officers, as staffing levels have deteriorated over several years, and you look at that, the opportunity to take police officers and assign them to this as a dedicated assignment where they would go out and do enforcement at certain places and not be taken away to do other things. That opportunity has diminished significantly in recent years. And if we are going to make a difference, we need to have the flexibility in our staffing model that we can assign police officers to these roles, and to get back to a time where there is time between radio calls for officers to engage in effective police enforcement. And right now, unfortunately, in most jurisdictions, in most divisions, or in fact in all divisions that I'm aware of, most of the day, officers go from high priority radio call to high priority radio call to high priority radio call, and the opportunity does not exist for them in those time periods to take part in proactive or reactive enforcement.
We have a fire alarm. We're going to have to recess, unfortunately. We'll come back.
seriously. If we don't, nobody does. So.
Hey, can I call the meeting back to order? Okay, we're in the middle of questioning the service on item number 3. Any further questions? Councillor Nunziata?
Okay, so as far as the financial implications in the report is for to forward this on to committee, and that it will be included in the 2020 operating budget, correct? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So is that just for the amount, for the $1 million and for the callback, or is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Not permanent?
It is put in for 2020. We have a commitment that we are working on towards carrying this through into 2021 if necessary.
Okay, so if we decide we want to carry it permanently, and we were told that it would, for the additional officers, that you would put it into the police services budget for 2021? No,
I think
because
that's
you have the
probably a
funding for
question beyond my
2020.
pay grade.
So right now, all that we've been able to, we've had discussions with city transportation, and they've agreed to fund, at least in 2020, $1 million of the cost.
So,
that's all we would have in our budget for
so
2020.
yes, exactly. So if we want to continue and have permanent funding, it would be in the budget for 2021, correct? Correct. Okay. So as far as the callback, how would that be allocated? Would it be divisions, or how would that work?
The idea.
Yeah, because are you looking at in the communities where we have the highest fatalities, or would it be divisions? Would it be one officer or 2 officers in each division? I'm not sure how that will work.
What we've proposed is we have a number of locations that have been provided to us. There's an appendix in the report that have been identified by Toronto Transportation in terms of data analysis for locations where they have taken various data streams that they have, chronic speeding, different violations, collision statistics, etc. They've identified these locations as high potential for safety improvement under their Vision Zero 2.0 plan. The idea would be, they believe that very dedicated, directed enforcement in those specific locations will have a very big difference, or will make a difference. So the locations are all across the city. They're throughout the city. So this staffing and this funding, we would be able to move these officers where and when we need them. The initial idea would be for 6 hours in the morning, 6 hours in the evening, that a team like this would be out doing it on a Monday to Friday basis. That being said, this funding will also allow us the flexibility to amend that on the fly as we move around, to make sure that we have them in the right places and at the right times.
Well, and that was my concern. So this list that was given by the city.
That's correct.
The list. So if there's a need to go into different communities, because overall, I think everyone, the whole city, all of us have issues with
Yes.
road safety, and we need more enforcement. So it can move from district to district.
That's correct.
Like, it's not just done in these districts that's part of the appendix.
No, and
Okay.
it will continue to be adaptable and movable. And the officers that we're going to utilize for this will be experienced traffic police officers who have proven a capacity or an interest in doing this type of work. So highly motivated police officers signing up on a voluntary basis, who are going out and doing this because they want to engage in it. And I think it's important to remember, the police officer, the members of this organization care very much about this. Mm-hmm. We want to make a difference. This is something that I believe we do make a difference. And I think it's important that this funding be put in place, because it allows us to truly make roads safer. And it is something that we've sworn a duty to do, so.
Right. And then in some areas where it's a school zone, where a lot of the problems are, should be working. I think the school board should be playing a part in this as well, in working with the city and the police. Because there's a lot of issues where these schools, like it's.
We're really
yeah.
hoping that the automated speed enforcement program
Yeah.
is going to come, and it has been something that we have advocated for a long time, because it's far more efficient, and we need that type of enforcement. But I also don't believe that enforcement can replace good police officers who do enforcement that goes far beyond that, looking at distracted driving and aggressive driving behaviors. That is the type of enforcement that you need a good cop out there paying attention and watching the roads to do something about.
And photo radar would be, once we get photo radar, correct?
Yes.
That would be a...
It has been approved for community safety zones and school zones. The city's program that they hope to roll out once regulations are approved by the province. I believe there's something in the neighborhood of 1,800 locations that have been identified in the city of Toronto, and the program's going to have 50 cameras that would rotate throughout those, and we believe they have a high potential for changing driver behavior as well, in addition to programs like this, and to having our police officers out doing what they can as they can.
Mm-mm. Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I have a question. Oh, Merit? Yes, okay. Chief, one of the deputants, Mr. Sewell, mentioned shift schedules. Can you tell me when shift schedules are fully implemented? I know you're well on your way. How that frees up some capacity for additional traffic enforcement?
Thank you, Chair. So over the past couple of years, we've been able to, through analytics and through working with experts, look at the models for policing for this city that would benefit to the maximum capacity and also address wellness of our people. And effective January 27th of this year, or next year, we will be doing our pilot projects and monitoring. What we have seen from the division that we have right now working on a new schedule, 41 division, and 23 is newly attached to this, is that there is more opportunity for that proactive policing. Within that proactive policing, it is deploying our people, intelligence-led, where they're needed and what they're needed for, and that will definitely encapsulate more opportunities for all of the frontline people right across the city to have more opportunity for enforcement with traffic and road safety, as well as the education piece for traffic safety.
Thanks, Chief. Mayor Tory?
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just ask one more question to make sure this motion that I've been working on here is not going to be, do more harm than good. I want to move that this funding be included in the budget as what I'll call a permanent or a regular part of the budget that provides for enough money to pay the exact same number of officers as the staff proposal says. I further amended it after I heard what you said to say we could start using the overtime method first to get it started faster, but that once the permanent, I'll call it the permanent funding was approved, and then it would be approved, contemplated to be approved each year thereafter, that's going to work for you. Because to me, when I heard you saying a moment ago through you, Mr. Chair, that you could have them 6 hours a day, what I'm suggesting has them available for their full shift every day, all day, to go wherever you want to send them, which is to me better than the number of hours provided for on overtime. And I think you still have the flexibility, if you're in charge, to send them wherever you want. I mean, just as the overtime did.
Correct.
So that's not going to do more harm. That would be a positive step to have this, I'll call it permanently funded in the budget, police officers whose job it will be to go and do the work that is contemplated by this initiative, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mayor Tory, I think you have a motion.
I do, if it's here,
Is it
Mr.
ready?
Chair. So again, what it provides for, through you, Mr. Chair, is that we take out the recommendation that's in there that deals with using overtime to do this and put the program cost into the 2020 operating budget for consideration as part of the 2020 budget process, and I can assure you I will support it. That the program be commenced at the time recommended in the report, which I think was fairly early on, and if they want to use the overtime method and the funds already allocated by the city to do that, that's fine to get it started quickly, which I think we should try to do. And then really following on your question, Mr. Chair, that we have the chief report back to the board in July on how the shift schedules, which are being gradually adopted across the city by the police officers allow us to do more of this kind of thing because of the flexibility that gives us in addition to other approaches such as callback and overtime.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Can I have somebody second Mayor Tory's motion? Or would anybody like to speak to, have a question of the mayor? Yeah, Francis Nunziata.
So it is recommended that the board direct the chief to include the program cost in the 2020 operating budget. So that would be adding that amount into their budget that they have now.
Well, yes, and here's my reasoning, and I asked a question to bring out this information, that the cost of paying the police officers through overtime, I would argue is actually going to be more per officer because it's being paid at overtime rates. And I would rather, since I heard the cost of hiring police officers on I'll call it a permanent basis to do this work, means not only are they available going forward for not just this year until the $1 million runs out, but going forward. So yes, it's going to be added to this budget, but one assumes that aside from the money that might be spent from the city to get this started early using overtime, that actually then that money won't be spent for this year. We'll simply add it to the police services budget, and I will certainly support having it added in 2021, 2022, 2023,
Right.
and so on and so
Yeah,
on.
so it will be a separate line item that there'll be an additional
Well, it'll be
$1 million
however they choose to put it in the
added
budget.
to their budget.
But I would like it to be a line item like that simply because it provides for these officers to be assigned to this purpose as opposed to just being added in and then there's a chance that maybe 6 months from now when nobody's looking, they end up doing something else. I'm not saying anybody would set out to do that, but I'm just saying it can happen because, they're busy. But I would want these officers to be dedicated to this purpose as is intended by this report. It's just they're paid for in the ordinary course and they're permanent police officers as opposed to being people that sign up for overtime.
Any other questions of the mayor?
No, I'll speak. Yeah.
Councilor
I'll
Nunziata?
second-
Yep.
I'll second the motion. Yeah, I would support the motion by the mayor, and I agree we need to have that permanent funding, as long as it's not going to take away that we are not going to we need officers on the street as far as the gun and violence that we're having on the streets. I don't want that funding to be taken away, what we need in the community as far as the gun violence that we have. It has to be separate and additional. And I agree, there's so many fatalities in the city, and we are doing our best as a city. And some areas we're reducing lanes, putting bicycle lanes, and in some areas like Scarlet Road, Councillor Ford, I know you're not happy about that, but we are doing our best. The big issue is around the schools, which is a real problem. I know all councillors have similar issues with schools. Drivers now are very aggressive. They're going through red lights. If you're turning at an intersection, unless you have to wait until all the cars stop before you turn, because nobody stops at a red light now. They're all going through red light stop signs, and you get a lot of calls on wanting enforcement. And drivers are very aggressive, and it's actually, a lot of people are very nervous in driving now because of the aggressive driving that you have. So I'm pleased that we're going to focus and get enforcement out and into the communities, especially in the high need community where there's a need for enforcement. Also, too, what really works too is that if we have a number of police cars that are not in use, old police cars, just park them at these intersections. If people see a police car, they slow down. I'll tell you, even if there's nobody in the car, they'll slow down, they'll see the police car. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Tory's motion. Councillor Nunziata, do you want to second that? Councillor Nunziata, are you seconding the motion? Yeah. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to receive. All in favor? That's carried. Item number 9 was held for a deputation by Mr. Moran, but I don't see him here. Not here? No, he's not here. So anybody want to hold that item or speak to it? Number 9, capital budget. Seeing no one. Somebody like to move it? Councillor Ford, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Nunziata, thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Item number 13 is held for deputations. I'd like to call on Mr. Sewell. Item number 13 is the annual statistical report of the Toronto Police Service. Mr. Sewell, welcome back.
Thank you. If you go to page 34, you'll see the summary of the stats on strip searches for last year. Total of 15,684 strip searches were undertaken. The report's not clear on how many individuals were arrested in 2018, but if you add up some of the figures, you can find it looks like about 36,000 people were arrested. So that means that about 41 or 42% of those arrested were strip searched. I know the deputy was saying that there, in terms of police forces around Toronto, we don't have good stats on how many are strip searched, and he's right about that. But we do have good stats on some other police forces in Ontario that strip search people. Ottawa, less than 1%. Kingston, less than 1%. Sudbury, less than 1%. So we've got good stats to show that what Toronto is doing is way, way, way out of line in terms of the other police forces. But the other thing that is noted on page 34 is what is produced in those strip searches. In more than 40% of the searches, nothing was found. Nothing. In 55% of the searches, something of little consequence was found, like earrings or keys or things like that. Only in less than 3% of the cases was evidence found. So it's really clear that, boy, we're really going overboard in terms of all that stuff to get nothing. And the point is that last year was not unusual. This data is reflected in stats reports from previous years. So last year was a normal year for the Toronto Police Force, where you aren't finding very much when you're doing the strip searches. And I think it makes the point. I mean, I know that the mayor's office asked for this information. Well, here is some of it. But it really means that something has to be done, and it's a pity we're going to have to wait until we get a report next March before we can get some change. We really need the change now. And I think the stats report makes that perfectly clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions? No. Thank you very much. Next deputant is Kofi Achampong. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my first time here, so if I make any mistakes, allow me some indulgence. Good afternoon. So I'm here to address item number 13 concerning the reported number of carding incidents. Sorry, can you hear me? The reported number of carding incidents in 2018. I'm sure all of you are aware that this made the headlines, obviously, because after years of having thousands of incidents of police carding, we had one in 2018. I'm also a defense counsel as well, and I can tell you that that number screams to me as flagrantly inaccurate. I don't know if the board is sincerely considering that as a realistic number to approve, but it does speak to some serious deficiencies in reporting mechanisms that currently exist. One can understand that police officers are apprehensive or, in essence, have stopped this practice officially, but I can certainly assure you that at the ground level, what I hear as a community organizer, what I hear from clients is that people are still being stopped randomly and being asked for their ID and information. So I think I'm here today to let the board know that we have to really ask ourselves whether or not we're getting accurate information about carding, and whether or not it's feasible for us to really consider that after hundreds of thousands of incidents of police data and interaction, we can now have one incident in the city of Toronto. I want to speak a little bit to what this also says. It says that the Toronto Police understand that this was a practice that was violative of constitutional rights. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the community has ever really heard a serious apology. Is that correct? I'm happy to hear thoughts. I know the chief apologized recently for the raids that were conducted on the LGBTQ community many years ago, and that goes some way because apologizing is important for healing and building trust. But the Toronto Police have been engaging in interactions with the community that have fundamentally destroyed their trust in their service. And I haven't heard anybody seriously apologize for that. Again, I'm happy to be corrected. Can we get an apology? If we're trying to heal and turn this community around and talk about community policing, can we get an apology? And it shouldn't come from the mayor. You know, I think it's helpful to have the mayor's voice, and you know, the mayor has multiple roles to play here, but it really should come from the Toronto Police. And it should be something that's loud. It should be something that resonates, that can be heard all around. The last thing I want to say is I was recently at a focus group with the Human Rights Commission, and as you know, they just completed their interim report, and they're working on their final report on police interaction with the Black community. Now, and this dovetails with what I've already said, but there's a lack of reporting mechanism that we can accurately and sincerely trust. If I have to require, if we rely on the Human Rights Commission to obtain this information to tell us what's happening with Toronto Police and the Black community, that's a real problem. We have to find some other mechanism, some way. And with all due respect, we can't expect that to come from local police stations. We need something at a more regional level, at a community level, that can inform us of what's happening in Scarborough, in Rexdale, in different communities in downtown, where people can go and inform some organization that's impartial, that's there to gather information, that can also obtain information from the police about the type of interactions that have been happening, so that people feel empowered. They don't have to give their names, they could be anonymous. But if I've been carded, I don't necessarily know where to go. I can't necessarily go to my counselor who has a million things to do. But I think the board has to really consider some mechanism to help us with identifying what's happening locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming. Any questions from the board on the report?
I have a question that is probably best directed to our council around the relationship between the regulated interactions panel reports and the statistical report that's before us. So I'm not sure, Mr. Teschner, if that's something you're able to speak to now, but we have received on a regular basis over the past 2 years reports of the review of the panel that was constituted very specifically to look at how the carding regulation or carding procedure was being implemented. And I am surprised that the data in this report is what it is. Thank you.
You're quite right. That panel was looking at a similar issue. This is a roll-up of annual data that the service provides, but you'll recall the last couple of reports from that panel also revealed a very low number, I think 3 or 4 instances that met the definition of a street check under the provincial regulation, which I believe is the approach that the service takes with respect to the statistical report as well. It's as defined in that provincial regulation. So The numbers are actually quite similar in terms of what's been reported by officers conducting street checks as defined in this statistical report as in the panels.
Thank you. So I do recall the numbers being very low, but they're not identical. So I just wondered, and maybe the service could speak to that at some point, because I just don't understand how we have these two different sets of numbers, which aren't widely divergent, but they're on the same subject matter. So we should be able to make sense of that. And then my second question is, I think it does reflect something that isn't being correctly captured, because I'm confident that the number can't be zero. We can't go from the period of what I think was very high number of both perceived and actual random stops to a recorded number of zero. So if there's any explanation that the chief or others can provide to us, that would be helpful. I'm not suggesting that things are getting better or worse. I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Chief, do you want to speak to that?
I'm not sure what the question is. There's a multiple framework to it, so what's
Are you surprised that the number is zero? And if so, can you offer us, or can your staff offer us any understanding? Because we're in a transition stage. I'm just looking for some further context.
I'm not surprised that the number is low. I've spoke to it before. The regulated interaction was very hard to interpret and then to put into action. So the people have basically defaulted to not doing anything, but doing things in accordance to law. So if they see behavior, or if they're in the framework of the law with respect to what they can and can't do in those moments, that's when you see the application of those interactions. I'm glad that Justice Tulloch spoke to and defined carding, which was random stopping and asking for information, which to me is just basically defining unlawful policing. And we have incorporated a very robust training to have our people understand what they should and should not do. We've revamped our training quite considerably, and one of the elements that I like is having the lived experience included in the lens of the training that has taken place with our frontline people. But I really do think that on our go forward, the education piece is something that we need to tighten up on, the knowing your rights piece. And I certainly remember the government of the day was supposed to put in tremendous funding for that. I had a look at that, and it really wasn't satisfactory, not just from me, but also from the community lens. Something more robust, I think, would really help strengthen the relationship that we have with all of our communities, and that is something that we're always actively working towards. But in those gray areas, the officers are, I think, more cautious. The fact that we have put mechanisms in place, not just with the training, but also some of the tools, the fact that every police car has a camera and microphone on it, and not just to record what's going on in the car, but when you're outside of the car too, I think is another lens and another mechanism that we do use to make sure that our officers are being compliant with their actions, and to reduce anything that comes across as random, I think is very critical. And the town halls that I've attended, the community relationship is not being negative. In fact, I found relationship positive. How we solve crimes, some of our serious crimes, has been because of input from the communities. And I take that as a testament that there's still room to grow, and there's a lot of room to grow. But through those relationships, we're getting stronger.
Thank you, and I really do echo your observation around the public education piece being key, so perhaps that's something that the board can take back, and we can look at how we want to move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muller. Any further questions? No, seeing none, can I have somebody move to receive? Ms. Mulliner, seconder? Councillor Ford, all in favor? That's carried. Item number 14 is next. That's a semi-annual report publication of expenses. We have one deputant, Mr. Moran, who is not here. Any members have any questions on this item? Seeing none, somebody like to move receipt? Councillor Ford, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? That's carried. Item number 15 is City of Toronto Council decisions establishing places of worship security task force. We have one deputant, Councillor Mike Cole. Councillor Cole. Councillor, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mr. Hart. Thank you, Chairman Hart and members of Police Services Board. I'm here with Alexander Katz, who's from the Better Bathurst Safety and Security Committee. He's also the General Manager of Congregation Kamal Avrahim, better known as the Boat Shul on Bathurst. And I'm here in speaking to the report following a motion by the City of Toronto where we asked for the Toronto Police Services Board to contact the RCMP and the OPP about the possibility of establishing a coordinated approach to dealing with hate crimes. And I read your report. I was glad to see the comprehensive work that's already been done that certainly we can acknowledge. And it's really part of the good work that's been done in the whole area of anti-Semitism especially, and hate crimes against all religions. But Mr. Katz is here as a perfect example of the anxiety there is around places of worship. His shul was burglarized by burglars with chainsaws, concrete chainsaws. They probably burglarized about 10 shuls, synagogues in Bathurst Street alone. Luckily, in this case, the shul had a good video camera system, and they sent it on to the police at, I think, a 53 division that made the arrest. Along with the reality of what Mr. Katz is going through, yesterday I had a call from another congregation that asked for me to try and change the parking laws on a side street so that the members of the congregation could park their cars in front of the entrance to the shul, the synagogue, to protect it from possible people driving up on the sidewalk. So I'm considering now trying to get the parking laws changed to protect people who, on the Shabbos, they walk, they congregate with their kids, their families, and they're very anxious about given what happened in Pittsburgh, what happened in California, what happened in other places of worship in Quebec, etc. They're asking for a more comprehensive support system. In the city, we were able to get through Toronto Parks and I think the Street Transportation Department, we were able even to supply about 80 planter boxes in front of places of worship. These planter boxes are temporary, but I was able to scramble up some planter boxes just to give people a sense of security. We just can't continue to operate this way. We need a comprehensive approach to prevent these possible attacks to occur. It is a multifaceted effort we need, and I think we need an ongoing collaboration, and I've talked to federal officials about it. They are more than willing to help contribute financially and otherwise into a joint report and a joint feasibility study of working together on a permanent basis to prevent and also to supply resources needed, because the cost of security guards, cameras, training is really prohibitive. And this is not only for synagogues, it's also for, or mosques, it's also for schools and seminaries. We probably have more religious institutions on Bathurst Street than anywhere else in the country. So we're talking about the lives of children, congregants that need some kind of comprehensive financial support, in terms of street furniture, in terms of street design, in terms of helping pay for the security system. Right now, the federal government has a program, I think it's only $4 million for the whole country. And as Mr. Katz has tried to get to that program, you need a Bay Street lawyer basically to fill out the form, and then you get rejected. So we need to have, I think, hopefully, I know the report doesn't support the call for a joint task force approach, but at least let's talk to the federal government, who I know is very interested in collaborating with the City of Toronto and the Toronto Police Services and putting something comprehensive in place so we can get resources in place and intelligence in place to try and make sure that our place of worship are safe, whether they be of the Jewish faith or the Muslim faith or the Catholic faith. I think all places of worship need comprehensive protection.
Councillor Cole, did Mr. Katz want to speak as well?
No, I think Council spoke well for us.
Okay. Any questions for the councillor, the deputant? Seeing none. Thank you, councillor. Appreciate you coming. Somebody like to move this report? Move receipt? Councillor Ford, seconder? Seconder? Councillor Nunziata, all in favor? Thank you. Item number 16 was held by Ms. Chandra-Casera. That's a quarterly report on occupational health and safety update, July the 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2019. I understand she held it to give compliments to the service. She had to leave. Any other members have questions on the report? Seeing none, would somebody like to move it? Move receipt. Ms. Molinar, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? That's carried. Item 17 is the same. Ms. Chandra-Casera held that. I want to give compliments to you, Chief, on your handling of that. Any questioners? Seeing none, somebody move receipt. Ms. Molinar, seconder. Councillor Ford, all in favor? That's the end of our agenda. Just an announcement before we adjourn. Our next meeting will be Monday, December the 16th. 2019, 1:30 at City Hall, Committee Room 2. Would somebody like to move adjournment? Mayor Ford, or Mayor, that was good. Mayor Tory, so I'll look at a Councillor Ford. Councillor Ford, second it. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried.